Okay, as you can probably tell by the upside down radio, here we have another Tram D201. This is a hand-wired version on the bench being restored. Received this one from the customer. He had bought it, I believe he said, on eBay, I think. Can't say for sure. I'm just trying to remember off the top of my head, but anyhow. And it's not working properly, and it doesn't surprise me it wasn't working properly. This video, now I've already gone through all of the electrolytic capacitors and all of the high wattage resistors. Have already been changed. It's rather obvious which are the new ones. Everything, you can tell all the resistors that I use are modern metal film flame-proof resistors all throughout. So all of these originally 3 watt, these have been replaced, and these here I've gone over before. When you replace these, try and leave them up a little bit higher so you don't nuke the resistors that are above this, because it's very common for these to get burned up because these are mounted down a lot lower. So try to always remember to leave the leads a little bit longer on those, leave those up. So all of the 3, the 2, and the 1 watt resistors, and then a few other small ones have been changed in here. Like here's one. I did a couple others. I think there's one, oh, where are we at? I did one in there somewhere. Oh yeah, it's down in there. Little small guy. I think there was another, like 1 or 2 in here that I changed. They were, you could see, there's one right there. A couple of them that I obviously gotten hot, and they were now out of tolerance. Matter of fact, here's all the parts, some of the resistors. There's the can caps. And you notice when I take the can caps out, I actually completely dismount them properly. So you can see there's the, all the terminals, everything's the original twist lock mounting plates, but everything's properly removed. I just desoldered. You can see this one only had 1 lug soldered, so I unsolder the wires, unsolder the lug. The can just drops out, down to the bench top, and then drill out the rivets. Now, one thing when you're doing that, always make sure, I use a vacuum while I'm doing my drilling, but even if you don't, just, drill your holes out. Just make sure you get all those brass, because the screws are, or the rivets are brass. Just make sure you use a vacuum to clean out all those brass shavings. The last thing you want are brass shavings coming in here and shorting out anything. One of the main problems this radio had, and you'll notice there's a new capacitor up under there and a new one right here. Normally I would not change those, because normally those would be, they would look just like these and that one. Any of these silver ones that you see that I did not change. There's one here, a couple down in here and here, another one back here. They're all over the radio. Those are tubular mylar capacitors. They are not electrolytic capacitors. Someone replaced that capacitor and that capacitor with electrolytic capacitors. They're supposed to be just like these, tubular mylar, which are just, it's just another version of this style here. They're just a non-polarized capacitor. But in any case, somebody had installed electrolytics in here. Now this capacitor here was probably the biggest problem, and that was the one that was causing all of the problems he was having. That capacitor right there is a straight feed-through capacitor for the negative bias supply for this radio. So the power comes off of the high voltage bridge rectifier circuit here through that capacitor, through this 220K resistor, and up through and goes out into the radio. But somebody had installed an electrolytic there, and then someone had also installed an electrolytic right here. And this is the AM, for your AM circuit, the audio compression. So someone had installed an electrolytic here also. Now they had changed, now all of these are new. I replaced literally every one. Someone had replaced this one, this one, this one. They'd replaced a couple in this area. They did it, the matter of fact, you can see them. Get my little tub up here. You can see there are some new ones in here, and the reason I changed them, you see how they install, you see how short that lead is, and there's a couple other ones down in here. Do some digging, but you see how short the leads are. Now if you notice, all the ones that I took out, see how the leads are long? I actually go in, completely unsolder. Fell through the abyss hole there. I unsolder the entire lead when I change a component. Desolder it, take it out, completely unwind it, and take the entire thing out. And then put, install the new one the way the factory would have installed it, through the terminal strip, looped around, pinched, with a pair of pliers, crimped, and then soldered. Whoever did this one just cut the leads off. So let's say they were changing this part right here. They would have just cut the lead off right here, cut the leads off of their brand new parts off really short, just held this part up, held one wire beside the other wire and soldered it. They didn't even bother to, fold them over and make a, like this, and make two little, which is fine, I guess. That's the way a lot of people do it when they recap a radio. They'll make a little hook like that on here, a hook on the, they'll cut the lead off flush with the original component, make a little hook there, and then you hook those two together, and then they'll, pinch those with a pair of pliers. And that, I guess, is a little bit more expedient, but I'm just, some would say anal, so I do it like basically they're installed exactly the same way the factory would have done it, other than I use silver solder, and they would have just used regular 60-40 tin lead solder when they did this. But yeah, that's the one thing, how they install them. Like I say, the main problem was just plain wrong capacitors. That is not supposed to be electrolytic, and that is not supposed to be electrolytic. So that was a big no-no. And I think that right there alone will take care of a lot of the problems. So the new can caps have already been installed. You see the heavy wire there, that's the ground wire. Now I always usually add, I always find a terminal tie here, so the nice heavy gauge solid wire runs in between the negatives on each of the can caps. And I'll find a factory one, because they use the rivet. Now there's a star washer underneath of these lugs. So I'll always tie to one of those usually on one side, and then I'll add one on the other side, and I usually go off the nut that I installed, and I use star washers also. So actually that's double nutted. So there's a, the screw comes up from the clamp, a star washer, a nut, then I install, it's just an eyelet terminal, but these are actual, if I take that nut off, the eyelet terminal actually has the star built into it. So the inside edge of that, the hole in the middle of that eyelet terminal is serrated and has the, it's a, basically, I guess you could say multi-functional component, because it's a star washer and terminal all in one, and then another nut. But then I tie that across to here, and then there's some ground wires here. But I try and make sure it's a really good ground, that they're grounded to more than one point, because these are the main caps for the radio. But when you're doing stuff like this, try and be careful. You're going to, because some of these caps, like way down in there, you've got parts that are buried down inside here, and you really got to move components around to try and get to leads. So you always stand a chance of, here'd be a good example. You could short those two wires out. That is not supposed to be touching that. So, before you go powering up, you want to go through and check stuff like that. That for starters, make sure and it's what I do. After it looks like I've got everything done. And I know everybody's tempted to, okay, I'm done. Rush to the power socket, plug it in, and try it. Don't. Go back through. Doesn't take long. Check to make sure all of your parts, for starters, are soldered in, because it happens to me, and that's why I go over. Occasionally I'll, because like all these 10Ks here, I usually just take all of them out at one shot. I know I've done enough of these, I just remember where most of these parts go. But, occasionally I might forget to solder one, because I don't replace one part at a time, desolder it, put the new one in, solder it, desolder it, put the new one in, solder it, desolder it, put the new one in, solder it. I don't do it like that. I'll desolder pretty much everything on this side, go through, especially parts I know are easy for me to remember. Like I say, these three are in series, these three are in series. I'll just do take a bunch of parts out at one time and put them all back in. But, you can forget to solder an end. It can happen. So just go through, make sure everything's soldered properly. And then the other thing is, go over and just check all the wiring, because this is point-to-point wired, whatever you want to call it, point-to-point, spaghetti wiring, bird nest wiring. It goes by a million different nicknames, but you've got all these flying lead wiring, whatever you want to call it. But there's lots of exposed leads on all these components all throughout here, so it's very easy, like I say, to get two components dead short. So just go through and make sure you don't have any shorts where you're not supposed to. One other thing I want to go over on this, I'm actually in the process, if you can see this is actually desoldered. I'm getting ready. In fact, if I reach over here, I'll grab them. I'm getting ready to, and it went down through the abyss hole. Put that hole there anyhow. But I'm getting ready to install modern, get these turned around, these modern capacitors, okay? I always replace these because I've seen these things blow out. This is a safety bypass capacitor, okay? It's dual element. It actually has 3 leads. There's one lead goes to each side. This is the AC power socket. So it has one lead, goes to each main AC line, and then there's another one in the center. So that's actually a 3-terminal capacitor, because it's actually formed by 2. If you look at it, you can see that it says 2x 4700P, so it's 2 4700 picofarad sections. And then that comes over and ties to the chassis ground strip. Now, if this is the absolute hardest working part, and I know I've said this before going over these radios, it's the hardest working part not only in this radio and most anything electronic, especially in this, because this is before the power switch. So anytime this radio is plugged into the wall, this capacitor is live in the line. Don't care what you do with the power switch, it's always on. So every power spike, surge, everything that comes through your house is going through this capacitor. So it's, you know, working. It's been working its butt off for decades. And like I say, I've seen these things blow up. Worst case scenario, because this, remember, it's a dual function. It's a safety and bypass cap. So the safety part is if this thing shorts out, you got to remember, one lead here goes to your chassis. And especially in this one, this is the early hand-wired version. This does not use a grounded power cord, okay? So if this capacitor shorts out and then a dead short to ground to the chassis, and you touch this thing, you know, all this is metal up here. You know, maybe silkscreen, but it's still metal. If you touch this, you could get electrocuted. So that's why I change them. Safety capacitors, you get X and Y ratings. And I use the X2s, which are these blue ones here. They're rated for line to ground. And no, excuse me. Let me rephrase that. The X2, that's this one. This one's rated for across the line, and then these two are the ones that go line to ground. These are actually dual rated. They're rated X1, Y2, but it's the Y2 is the rating for line to ground. But so I'll have one blue one will go from this terminal to ground, the other one will go from the other terminal to ground, and then this yellow one, the little yellow box capacitor, will go across the line. Now, like I say, they're multifunctional. Not only are they safety caps, they're also bypass caps. So any RF or anything, a lot of your interference, and you know, stuff that can come in through your power lines, that's part of the idea behind these, is they help to filter that noise off to ground, to the chassis, you know, to the common chassis ground point. So, you know, not only do they have a performance aspect, like I say, they also have the safety aspect, but always, you know, even if you're not using, you don't have to use this, I just stick that in there, because pretty much anything electronic, if you open anything, you know, electronic nowadays, you're going to see these little yellow boxes right off of the power line. They're also filter caps, so, you know, I always install these two, like I say, just a good practice. They don't cost that much more. But one thing I did notice while I was doing this, I think I've covered this before, this transformer has, okay, 3 sets of windings come off of it. So the black wires, okay, if you follow them, go into the transformer, that's your 120 volt going in. The red wires are your high voltage, come over here to the high voltage rectifier circuit, which is where that wrong capacitor was actually hooked up. They had an electrolytic capacitor hooked straight up to the AC line right there. The yellow wires, that's your low voltage circuit, so you follow those over, it comes over to the low voltage rectifier circuit for the low voltage, because remember, there are some solid state components on your balanced modulator board. There are some transistors in here. It's not 100% solid state. So, you know, there's some transistors here, transistor here. There's a couple in there, and there's even a few ICs. But so that's your low voltage circuit. And then your green, these big heavy green wires, and I don't get tricked, there's another set of green wires here go up to the audio transformer, but these two are the filament voltage, or heaters. So one of these comes over and goes to the tube socket. Okay, and then from here it branches off to all the other tubes in the radio to supply the voltage for the heaters or filaments inside all the tubes, and that's what makes the tubes glow and do their magic. The other wire comes to a right here, okay, and you'll notice right now it's not attached to anything. There's just that's just that wire just hanging out there. It's supposed to come over and go over to here to this other terminal. There's supposed to be a fuse link wire. So this radio actually is supposed to have, a lot of people think there's a fuse here, fuse on the upper side here. If you have the one with circuit board, you'll notice on the balance module, or the BA board, sometimes you'll notice there's a fuse on there. But most people don't realize that piece of wire is actually a fuse. Now from the factory, what would be there would be a piece of, looks like tinned wire, but it has a little clear plastic tubing over top of it. So it can't short out against anything. That's actually a fuse. It's fuse link wire. Matter of fact, if we go over here to the schematic, okay, if you look down here, say there's 3 sets of windings, or actually 4. There's your primary windings coming in off the power line, then there's 3 sets going out. Your low voltage circuit, your high voltage circuit, and then here's your filaments. Notice the one goes out to all of the filaments, the other one goes to ground. That's at 28, number 28 wire. Notice it doesn't say fuse, it says number 28 wire. So nowadays we call that fuse link wire. It's basically just a fuse. But a lot of people, and what that's there for is it's a separate fuse for the filaments. If the filaments or the heaters in one of the tubes should short out against another section inside the tube, it protects the transformer from burning up. It doesn't depend on the any of the other fusing in the radio. It has basically its own fuse to protect the transformer, to protect this portion of the transformer. So, big mistake is, if that does burn up, which can happen, tube filaments can, the heaters can short out inside of a tube. It's not like that's uncommon. It doesn't happen very often, but it does happen. The problem is, people will trace it down to that piece of wire, and they think it's just that. It's just a piece of wire. Maybe for some reason Tram just had a jumper there. That's what they think it is. It's a jumper wire. It's not. It's a fuse. Well, somebody had replaced it in this, and they did what I always tell people not to do. They replaced the number 28 wire with a much larger wire. And they did their same little thing. They just soldered it, just like they did the capacitors and all the other parts they replaced, cut the old one out and just kind of tack soldered it. But notice the difference. This end is the original number 28 wire. And then look at how thick this other piece of wire is. And actually, I even had to, Mitutoyo dial calipers out there to measure it. The piece of wire they replaced it with is 1/100th of an inch, because this is .015. This is .025. So it's 2/100th of an, or 1/100th of an inch bigger in diameter. It's it's not quite twice as big, but it's getting darn close to twice the diameter. That's way too big. By putting that piece of heavy wire in there, if a tube filament ever shorts out, with that heavy piece of wire in there in place of the proper fuse link wire, stand a good chance of burning up this transformer. So what's cheaper, finding a piece of 28 gauge wire, a little tiny piece of wire that only needs to be that long, or buying a whole transformer and replacing it? You tell me. So what you want to use is a piece of, it's nothing fancy. I just have, it's in an envelope. I just happen to have them here marked, Tram D201 heater filament fuse link wire, 28 gauge. It's nothing more than just standard wire. I've just taken a, piece of normal wire, like this, whatever this was. But, go through and find something that's the right gauge, okay? Because your normal stranded wires, like these, there's more than one wire inside of this insulation. It's made up of 8, 10, 20, however many wires. Smaller gauge wires, kind of twisted together, and then the insulation. But find one that has 28 gauge, wire in it, and then just cut you out a short piece. I just happen to have a bunch of them in an envelope because I end up doing a lot of these. So, I've got, get it open here. You see there's a bunch of them down in there. So I've got a good supply of them. And then whenever I run out, I just find another piece of wire that's made up of 28 gauge wire and cut them. But then just do yourself a favor. Put a piece of tubing over that. So for the same reason Tram did it, so you don't have that live wire that can short out, because remember, this is 120 volts right here, and that wire is right here, and the last thing you want is that little wire. The filament wire is touching the 120 volt line, so make sure you put a little piece of insulation over that. But always use number 28 wire. Never, ever, ever do what the person did with this thing, which was install heavier gauge wire. It was darn close to 2 times as thick. So guaranteed way to, if that, you know, a tube would burn up, to burn up your transformer. So I think that pretty much covers. Oh, and I'd also replaced, you might notice some of these sand block resistors are a lot newer looking. That's because they were replaced. These two, I always say, some nice thing about these, when they show signs of heavy use, or, you know, they've been heated up a lot over time. Pull one of the old ones out here. I'm not sure how well it'll show, but turned right. You see how, let's find one where it's easy to sit it side by side. It doesn't show. It might show up okay on the camera there, but you can see how faded this one is. It almost kind of takes on like a brownish purple light color, where this is still nice and dark black. When these things have been cooked, you know, had the snot cooked out of them, that black changes color just like these did. So that's a good indication these things have been. Now they're wire wound, they last for a long time, but I have seen, you know, the bottoms will start to crumble after they. But usually by the time they get to this point where the ink is, it's affected the color, it's no longer black. Usually they're getting to the point where they actually start to get a little bit crumbly. And then the other thing I do, because these two get so hot, you'll notice this is if you look at it here, it says it's got PW7. This is a 7-watt resistor, and I replaced it, and I can set it on top here. You can see how much bigger it is. I replaced it with a 10-watt resistor. So, you know, it can dissipate heat more easily because there's just simply more surface area. So the surface of this will never get as hot as this one did. So, and same thing with this one. Now, I didn't change this one because it was worn out. I changed that one because not long after I took the bottom cover off of this, I touched it and the lead broke off. Somebody had done the normal power mod down in here for, you know, different power levels, and had bent this thing back and forth so many times over the years, it just, the terminals broke off right there where it goes in. So, but same thing, anytime I replace basically a resistor in something tube type, I always go bigger. So you can see here, this originally was an IRC, International Resistor Corporation. It was a PW15, so that was a 15-watt resistor originally, and you'll see I've replaced it with a 25-watt resistor. So this one also lined up there. You can see physically how much bigger that one is. So same thing, you know, you're going to change it. It costs a little bit more, not much, you know. you already have to buy the part. The increase in size, it doesn't cost that much more. So, you know, buy the next bigger in size and replace it. Like I say, it'll keep all the surrounding components a little bit cooler because the surface temperature of these will not get as hot as the original smaller versions did. So, and it's one of the reasons I changed when I, you know, change these resistors. I go to the bigger size a lot of times. So I think it covers a few little tips for you. Like I say, it's mainly a lot of attention to detail. Watch what you're doing, especially with stuff like this. Now, actually, I think probably the person that did this, I don't know if they were trying to do a cap job, you know, change all the electrolytic capacitors, and gave up. They got lost, I think. You know, they started changing them and realized rather quickly, that's why they only really did the ones in this area, that they were going to run out of capacitors. They didn't have enough, and I think that's why, because they were changing these tubular mylar non-polarized capacitors. I think they thought these were polarized capacitors. And I guess if you don't work on radios every day, it could be a common mistake, because if you look down here, now capacitors will usually have, you know, these newer ones have the negative sides marked with an arrow pointing to the negative end. You know, the original, like this one here, has positive, little band of positives there, and that's to let you know. But the easiest way to tell that this is electrolytic and this is not is to physically look. You don't need to see any writing on it. You can take the wrapper off any of these capacitors, and I can still tell you just by looking at it if it's electrolytic or not. If you look at one end, this is, you see, that's solid aluminum, or it's a can, and the lead is attached to that can. If you notice, that can goes the whole length here, and then it's crimped, and it's got this rubber in the other end. Same as all the new ones. Same thing. They look the exact same way, the electrolytics. These are nice pliable rubbers still. But this lead here on one end is isolated from that can. It's, you know, obvious. There's a big difference in the looks from one end of the capacitor to the other. And the one that's metal is always going to be the negative. That's the outside. They're always going to make that negative. The positive is always going to be the one that has the lead, the little contact button there, and goes inside, but it's insulated from the can. If you look at these capacitors down here, if I can find one where you can see both sides. See that? That end looks like right there? Okay, there, the camera's good and focused. You see that? That looks like? If we slide around to the other side, see that? It looks exactly the same. Okay, I think what they did is they saw these capacitors, and a lot of them, see that black band? They probably assumed that black band was, I don't know what they thought, probably negative, but they thought that was negative or positive, and it's not. That is not a polarity for this capacitor, for this style, for non-polarized, because remember, it's not polarized. These are not. The band on these capacitors indicates which lead goes to the foil wrapping that is the outermost wrap. Because basically these capacitors are made basically the same, as this one. It's just the plates in this one are one's longer than the other one. But in a nutshell, this consists of a piece of plastic, plastic sheet. There's a sheet of aluminum foil, a sheet of mylar, because these are mylar tubulars, or plastic, another sheet of aluminum, and another sheet of plastic, and then it's just rolled up. And there's one lead attaches to one of those aluminum plates, the other lead attaches to the other aluminum plate. But, if we were making our, theoretical or demonstration capacitor, the piece of foil that you laid down first, that's going to be the wrap on the outside of this capacitor. And that's what that black band indicates. It indicates which one of these terminals goes to that wrap that's on the outside. Now, we, as the technicians, want to know that, because that should go to ground. Because the majority of these capacitors you see, if you follow these things in a series, now some of them will be in series, like this one here. This one doesn't go to ground. That's actually a pass-through. It goes straight through from the high voltage circuit through that cap and feeds the bias supply. Matter of fact, I can show you that cap on the schematic here as well. If I get it flipped around in the right direction. So here's the capacitor right here. It's C7. Okay. Someone had installed an electrolytic there. Okay, and electrolytics in tram schematics look just like that. And you see how I was saying about a can? How, as a matter of fact, this is an electrolytic. Okay. That actually represents the outer can of this. So that's representing this end here. The positive end on the schematic has a plus. That's the end that does not go to the metal can. But notice these are the same as any of the other ones that are, in this schematic up here, that are just going to be, like here, ceramic capacitors. They use the same exact markings. The only way to tell what the difference is to look at the service manual and look at the parts listing, and it'll tell you mylar, tubular, or ceramic. But, yeah, that's not supposed to be electrolytic, and that, if you follow over, feeds the negative bias supply for the radio. So that was a big no-no, putting an electrolytic there. Like I say, it was a big part of the problems in this radio. But, like I say, the idea behind marking that outer wrapping on this capacitor is, if you hook the outer wrapping up to the active part of the circuit, so this one, and this is a good example because this end does go to ground in this one, and the other end hooks up to the tube. Well, if you were to hook this end up to the tube, the outer wrapping can act like an antenna because it's on the outside. And then anything that little antenna then is picking up, it's going to feed into your circuit. So you can get all kinds of AC hum, all kinds of interference, static, that can cause all kinds of noise problems. So you always want to make sure when you install these non-pol, they may not be polarized, but they still have, there's going to be somewhere in that capacitor, the outermost part of it. You always, whatever's the outermost part of this capacitor, you want to make sure that's the part that goes to ground. The other part is the part that you're going to actually hook up in your circuit. So there's a few tips and those tips, apply to not just the Tram D201, to pretty much anything, electronic, any old radios. So hope some of those tips can help you. Like I say, two of the biggest things is make sure when you're replacing parts, put the right type of part in. Don't replace non-polarized capacitors with polarized electrolytic capacitors. And for God's sakes, don't go just sticking in whatever piece of wire you have handy in here, in place of that number 28 fuse link wire, because you're just begging to let the smoke out of there, and that is an expensive smoke bomb. So, and because once you get the smoke, you let the smoke out of something electronic, it's really hard to put the magic smoke back in. Okay, I thought I would really quick show what I've done since you saw this last portion. I thought I'd just show the new fuse link wire installed and the safety bypass capacitors here installed. So, like I say, this is the X2. It's installed across the line, and then these are, like I say, these are dual rated X1 Y2. So these can actually be used in either case. I just like these. These work a little bit better for across the line filtering, and then these have the rating where they're allowed for use from line to ground. So, and like I say, these are individuals, where the original down here, that should be easy to see now that it's out, and I just dropped it, but see how it has 3 terminals. So it's just a ceramic capacitor, and you can see there it says 2 times 4700 P, or picofarad. So, and you can see they used a 1 kilovolt rating. They don't need that big, and these are rated for, God, without looking at them here, it's those type of caps are rated for what, 275 volts. This was a huge safety factor for them back then, but like I say, they didn't have the technology and they weren't actual safety caps, so they used a lot higher voltage rating, where these things are designed, if they fail, not to flame out like these do. And that's, like I say, a big reason I've replaced them is I've seen them go bad before and burn up and see charred markings. This would be all black from where this thing burned up. So, but like I said, important to change that, and like I say, really important to protect your transformer from burning up was to put a proper size wire. So now inside of this is a piece of Teflon tubing, and I use Teflon tubing because if the wire does ever burn up, it won't melt. I can stick a soldering iron. It has a really, really high temperature. So anytime you see this orange tubing here, that's orange or black. I've got it in a bunch of different colors, but that's actual Teflon. So it's now encased in that. So if the wire does burn up, it's not going to be a loose wire flapping around in here. But the main thing is it's the proper size. That big chunk of wire somebody else had installed in there, if a filament had burned, or shorted out, there's a really good chance they'd have taken out the transformer. Now filaments can feel free to short out all they like, and this piece of wire here will melt in half like it's supposed to do. So I thought I'd just do a quick little add-on to this video to show what it looks like in here after that's done properly.